August 6, 1945, roughly 2:45 in the morning. AB-29, named Enola Gay taxis, down runway Able, on a speck of coral in the Marianas, called Tinian, carrying a single bomb. In a few hours, it drops that bomb on Hiroshima and changes the shape of the century. Nobody watching the takeoff is thinking about the runway. It's just there, 8,500 feet of poured concrete, one of 6 strips laid out on a grid, modeled after the streets of Manhattan, on an island that 13 months earlier was Japanese sugarcane fields defended by roughly 8,000 men. 13 months. That's the whole gap between Tinian being enemy territory and Tinian becoming, by most historians' accounting, the largest airbase on the planet, able to park and launch hundreds of heavy bombers at once. Somebody built that. Who, and how fast, is one of the more consequential facts of the Pacific War that almost nobody outside the Navy has heard explained properly. This isn't a story about the bomb. It's about the men who built the place the bomb took off from, and about something most historians agree: Japanese planning badly underestimated how fast the United States could turn a battlefield into a functioning international-scale airport. Go back to December 28, 1941, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. Rear Admiral Ben Morial, chief of the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, asked for authority to do something the Navy had never formally done: organize construction workers as a uniformed military unit that could build under fire and fight if attacked. Civilian contractors had no legal standing as combatants. If captured, they could be treated as guerrillas instead of prisoners of war. Morial wanted tradesmen, who were also sailors. He got his authorization on January 5, 1942. The units got their name on March 5, Seabees, a phonetic run of CB for construction battalion. Morial gave them a Latin motto: Construimus, Batuimus, we build, we fight. The recruiting pool was specific: carpenters, electricians, steam shovel operators, welders, plumbers, surveyors, drawn from more than 60 trades, with the age limit waived up to 50. Early CB battalions ran noticeably older than typical Navy recruits, commonly cited around age 37, because the Navy wasn't looking for young men. It was looking for men who already knew how to build things and just needed a few weeks to learn to carry a rifle. The first deployed unit left Rhode Island on January 17, 1942, less than 2 weeks after Morial got the green light. By July 1942, Seabees were on Guadalcanal, rebuilding a captured Japanese airstrip under enemy fire, sometimes fighting alongside the Marines by night and grading the runway by day. That airstrip became Henderson Field, the most fought-over ground in the early Pacific War, because whoever held it controlled the air over the southern Solomons. That pattern kept repeating, each time faster. At Tarawa, in November 1943, Seabees landed with the assault troops and had the wrecked Japanese airfield operational for aircraft in about a day. The figure shows up in slightly different forms across CB histories, but it's consistently described as astonishingly fast, under fire, on ground that had been a battlefield that same morning. By the time the war reached the Marianas in summer 1944, the Navy had run this process enough times to execute it at a scale few militaries had ever attempted. Tinian itself is small, 39 square miles of coral, about 10 miles long. Marines took it in a 9-day battle that ended August 1944, at a cost of close to 400 Americans killed. The roughly 8,500-man Japanese garrison was almost entirely destroyed. Within days, around 15,000 Navy Seabees under the 6th Naval Construction Brigade came ashore behind the Marines with bulldozers, dump trucks, rock crushers, and asphalt plants, and started building what the National Park Service and most Pacific War historians call the largest airbase of the war, and the largest airfield anywhere in the world at the time. The volume of what they moved is hard to picture. CB and Navy histories often describe the crushed coral excavated and packed at Tinian as several times the volume of the Hoover Dam. That comparison shows up over and over in popular retellings, but it's a rhetorical yardstick, not a line from an original engineering report, so treat the exact multiple as illustration rather than fact. What isn't in dispute is the result. 6 runways, each 8,500 feet long, across 2 complexes, Northfield and Westfield. Individual runways went up in roughly 7 to 8 weeks apiece, not all on an identical schedule, but fast enough that veterans and historians call it the miracle of construction. Crews worked long, overlapping shifts to keep pace, and maintenance teams fought constantly to keep bulldozers and rock crushers running against coral abrasive enough to shred tires and boots. When ordinary blasting couldn't break up a hillside of coral, one Seabee unit reportedly had a Marine tank crew fire armor-piercing shells into the rock face first, so dynamite charges could finish the job. The anecdote shows up across multiple Seabee unit histories. They laid the island out on a grid, modeled after Manhattan, with roads named after New York streets and landmarks, Broadway among them, partly for navigation, and partly, the record suggests, to give thousands of homesick young men something familiar to walk down at the end of a long shift. By the time Northfield's 4th runway was finished in May 1945, the combined Tinian Airbase had roughly 13 miles of runways and taxiways, ramp space for hundreds of B-29s, and about 40,000 people supporting it. By any reasonable measure, it was the busiest, largest airport that had ever existed, built in months, on ground that had been enemy-held jungle and cane field weeks before. From those runways, B-29s of the 20 Honest Bomber Command flew the incendiary raids that devastated Tokyo, Osaka, and dozens of other Japanese cities through spring and summer 1945. They flew the mining missions of Operation Starvation that choked off Japanese shipping. And, in a separate, fenced-off compound on the northwest edge of Northfield, Seabees built something else, specially engineered pits with hydraulic lifts, built for a unit whose mission was classified even from most of the other men on the island. Those pits were built to load a single weapon into the belly of a B-29. The construction crews generally weren't told what it was for. They found out with the rest of the world on the morning of August 6th. The cost in Seabee lives across the Pacific says something about what building under fire at that pace actually meant. Official and unofficial tallies vary depending on what's counted, but figures commonly put Seabee combat and construction-related deaths in the Pacific somewhere between a few hundred and roughly 700 men. Across the war, Seabee units built or rebuilt something like 100 to 120 airstrips in the Pacific Theater, drawing on a total wartime force of roughly 325,000 men. Here's the part most historians agree on, stated carefully. Japanese military planners, like most militaries of the era, appear to have badly underestimated how fast the United States could build and expand major airbases across the Pacific, and that miscalculation let American air power move faster than Japan had prepared for. There's no single surviving Japanese planning document that spells out an assumption that airfields always take months. That would overstate the record. What the record does show is the gap in outcomes. No other combatant in the Pacific fielded anything like a purpose-built force whose entire job was collapsing the normal timeline of military construction. The United States built that capability on purpose, starting with a Navy memo in December 1941. Every country in the war had good engineers, brave ones too. What set the Seabees apart is that construction speed itself had been treated, since early 1942, as a weapon, organized, trained, and equipped like one. The distance between an 8-day battle for Tinian and a B-29 taking off for Hiroshima was a matter of weeks of Seabees running heavy equipment around the clock, on ground still warm from combat. Most people have never heard that story, because there's no single dramatic moment to point a camera at. There's just a rock crusher running through the night, a runway that was jungle weeks before, and a plane taking off from it that changed the world. If this kind of story matters to you, a like keeps it in front of the people who'd want to know it. If your grandfather, uncle, or great-uncle served with the Seabees in the Pacific, his battalion and his island belong in the comments. These names are disappearing faster than most people realize. Subscribe if you want the next one.